what are the key negatives when we consume the levels of sugar that many of us are currently consuming?
Well, first of all, let's make it very clear that sugar is not the only problem in our diet. It's the big one. It's the 2,000-pound gorilla in our diet, but there's other stuff too. But sugar is a particularly egregious molecule. Once upon a time, trans fats were the worst thing we consumed. Trans fats are the devil incarnate. Trans fats, the bacteria can't chew it up, which is why they put the trans fats in, all right, so that, it would last forever, the 10-year-old Twinkie. Well, the fact is our mitochondria, our little energy burning factories inside all our cells, are really refurbished bacteria. We can't chew it up either. So the exact same reason for why they put the trans fats in the food is exactly why you shouldn't eat the food. Now we know that, and they've come out of our diet. So now sugar is public enemy number one. So what does sugar do? And the answer is a whole bunch of bad things. The food industry says sugar is energy. Well, they're correct if you're a bomb calorimeter. If you just blow it up, if you explode it, yeah, you get 4 calories per gram. But we are not bomb calorimeters. Turns out that sugar actually poisons the mitochondria. Okay, it poisons it at 3 separate enzymes that are necessary for mitochondria to do their job. The first one, AMP kinase, which is the fuel gauge on the liver cell. The second one, ACAD-L, acyl-CoA dehydrogenase long chain, which is necessary to get fatty acids into the mitochondria to be able to oxidize them to create energy. And the third one is CPT1, carnitine palmitoyl transferase 1, which is the enzyme that regenerates carnitine, which is the shuttle mechanism that brings the fatty acids into the mitochondria in the first place. In other words, when you consume sugar, you are poisoning your mitochondria. You are generating less of the chemical energy that our cells get powered by, called ATP. So if you're making less ATP, is that energy? It's the opposite of energy. So when you consume sugar, you are actually inhibiting your body's energy production. Can you think of a chemical that inhibits your mitochondria and reduces ATP production? Cyanide.
Cyanide.
Cyanide. Cyanide does that. Okay, sugar and cyanide do the same thing. Now, obviously, not as severely. Okay, cyanide parts per million keel over and die on the spot. With sugar, it's in the parts per thousand, and you don't keel over on the spot, but you feel lousy, and over time, it's going to take its toll. But ultimately, if you're inhibiting your mitochondria, you are poisoning your body. And we now have the data to show how that occurs. So here's my question to you and your audience. Sugar is in virtually all ultra-processed foods, and ultra-processed foods are now 56% of the UK diet, and the amount of sugar that Brits eat, 62% of it is found in the ultra-processed food category.
Wow.
So my question to you and your audience is ultra-processed food food?
My view is that it's not really. I would say no, but I know to many people that is super controversial, which we're definitely going to talk about. But yeah, on a straight answer, I would say no. Depends on your definition, I guess, because it's energy. Okay. It's got some calories in it, which we consume in our mouth that enable us on one level to sort of, I guess you're saying it's actually reducing the energy production, the sugar within it anyway. But yeah, on one level, it sustains people and they can actually get on with their days, at least in the short term anyway.
Well, you have to know what the definition of food is. So if I had my Webster's dictionary right here, right now, You guys, in the UK probably don't use Webster's. You probably have something else. But if I pulled it off the shelf, it would say that the definition of food is the following, and I have no problem with this definition: substrate that contributes to either the growth or burning of an organism. That's the definition. I have no problem with that definition. It's a fine definition. All right. Substrate that contributes to either the growth or burning of an organism. So we've just talked about burning. Sugar does not contribute to the burning of an organism. It actually inhibits the burning of an organism. And Dr. Kevin Hall at the NIH did a study where he showed that when you give people ultra-processed food, they burn less and gain more weight when everything else is controlled for compared to the same diet in real food. Did this in 2019. So ultra-processed food does not contribute to burning. So now let's go to growth. Does ultra-processed food contribute to growth? My colleague, Dr. Efrat Monsenigo-Ornan, who is the chairman of the Department of Nutrition at Hebrew University, Jerusalem, just published 3 papers in Bone Research showing that ultra-processed food actually inhibits skeletal growth, inhibits the ability of bones to increase in length and in width. And in addition, we know from the Nutrinet Santé study and many other studies that, in fact, what sugar does is it feeds cancer cells, it hijacks growth. So, sugar doesn't contribute to burning, inhibits it, doesn't contribute to growth, inhibits it, or hijacks it. So, I pose the question to you again, Rangan. Is ultra-processed food food?
I'll go with my original answer, which is no.
That is right. It is no. Ding, ding. That's right. But the point is that the food industry, refuses to go there. The populace refuses to go there. The governments refuse to go there. And you and I are both interested in mitigating chronic disease.
Yeah.
And you are right. If you get people on a real food diet, you can mitigate virtually any and all of their chronic diseases. I completely agree. You gave a TEDx talk basically saying you can basically take away somebody's chronic disease. I used to do that in my clinic, when I was practicing routinely.
Yeah.
But only if they changed the food. And if they didn't change the food, no amount of medicine I threw at them could make a difference.
Yeah, I mean, what strikes me as a really key message is that the majority of what we're buying to feed ourselves and our families is ultra-processed food, whether it's here in the UK or with you in America. And that is contributing to this tsunami of chronic ill health that we're seeing. It's pretty alarming. But what I think is so key, Rob, for me, is that it's so normalized now. Like it's the norm everywhere, schools, hospitals. In fact, if you want to go down the real food route, you almost feel like a bit of a, if you try and do it with your kids, you actually become a social outcast in some ways.
You're a pariah.
And I think this is the problem. It's the norm. We've moved so far away from what we used to do. In fact, maybe this is a good time for you to explain what you used to do when you were 8 years old, because I believe you had a granddad who lived in Brooklyn. And every Saturday you would do something which I think beautifully illustrates this point.
That's right. So bottom line is I completely agree with you. What we've done is we've normalized it. Once upon a time, it was actually not normal to eat ultra-processed food. And today it is normal. And I remember when that happened because it happened to me. It happened to me in 2 ways. So on Saturday afternoons, my family would go visit my grandparents who lived about, 8 miles away in Brooklyn. And my grandfather would walk me down to the corner grocery store to buy a comic book and a 6.5-ounce bottle of Coca-Cola. And I remember, pretty much every Saturday afternoon. And that was the big treat, the comic book and the Coca-Cola. That was on Ocean Avenue and Avenue N in Brooklyn. The fact is that was once a week and it was 6.5 ounces. All right. Today, children are consuming about, I think, 35 ounces a day, median. So they are getting about 6 times the amount of sugar that I did from that one Coke. And they're doing it every day instead of once a week.
Can we just pause on that for a second? You're saying you had 6 ounces once a week, and we're assuming back then that the rest of your diet throughout the week was low in sugar, low in processed foods, sort of a real food diet?
Well, my mother worked 3 jobs, and so I ate a lot of Swanson TV dinners when they first came out. And I remember when they came out around 1964, the fried chicken, the Salisbury steak. I hated that Salisbury steak. And she trained me on how to turn the oven on and how to heat them up, because often she wasn't home at night. So, to some extent, I was a latchkey kid because my mother worked so hard.
Yeah.
My father was in Manhattan all day. And so, I basically had to sort of take care of myself. And sometimes I had to eat dinner, out of the freezer. And so I remember, those Swanson TV dinners, and, they were a problem, and they're still a problem. So you put the two together, and that was the beginning of, the, shall we say, onslaught of processed food in the United States about the mid-60s. Then things picked up even more in 1975 when we started substituting high fructose corn syrup for sucrose because it was half as expensive and it was homegrown. And then finally, the pièce de résistance came in 1977 when the McGovern Commission released its report saying that we all needed to eat less fat to try to prevent cardiovascular disease. Well, when you take the fat out of food, it tastes like cardboard. And so what did the food industry do? It basically replaced the fat with sugar. That's why we ended up with Entenmann's fat-free cakes and, and the like. And that was when the pasta craze, first hit was, refined carbohydrate because it was, quote, low in fat, et cetera. And, now we're off to the races. And it's just exploded ever since.
Is it the sugar that's inherently bad in and of itself, or is it the excess amounts? I mean, or is it both, right? Because I think a lot of people might say, well, look, you know what? This never used to be a problem, right? And we would have the odd sweet treat now and again. But so, and actually there's quite a few prominent scientists, as you're well aware, Rob, who say actually sugar's not a problem. Sugar's actually completely fine.
Yeah, we're working on it. I have a bone to pick with some of those scientists, and we can argue that and talk about that if you like, as to exactly why they say what they say. So here's what I can tell you. All right. There are social drinkers and there are alcoholics. Now, social drinkers can pick up a beer and put it down, and they don't need one every day. Alcoholics pick up a whiskey and can't put it down, and they need it 3 times a day. Right?
Yeah.
Did the one beer that the social drinker drank hurt them?
Unlikely.
Unlikely. And the reason it's unlikely is because there is what is known as a first pass effect. You drink the alcohol in the beer. First of all, it's very low percentage, right? It's only about 3.6% in a beer. All right, and that is about 60 calories worth or so of alcohol. And what happens is that the first pass effect, the stomach and intestine metabolize that alcohol before any of it ever gets to the liver. And so the amount that actually hits the liver that could do damage is exceedingly small. And as long as you're not following up with a second beer and a third beer and a fourth beer and a fifth beer, like can happen at the Newcastle pub, you don't usually have a big problem, right? But if you keep doing that, then that is a problem. So it's a dose-dependent phenomenon. And your intestine is there to try to protect your liver from getting the onslaught before it will do damage. Same with sugar. No difference. So your intestine can take a small amount of sugar that you consume and can actually turn it into fat in the intestine. Intestinal de novo lipogenesis, the process of converting sugar to fat into VLDL in the intestine so that it will not go straight to your liver, right? And about 10% of an initial sugar bolus will undergo intestinal DNL and therefore be diverted away from the liver and into the bloodstream as VLDL. Now, that VLDL is not great for you because it could ultimately cause heart disease, but it's protecting the liver. But if you consume past your intestine's capacity to do that, now the rest of it's going to end up in your liver. And the problem with sugar in the liver is exactly the same as the problem of alcohol in the liver, because it causes the exact same processes. It causes glycation, it causes oxidative stress, it causes mitochondrial dysfunction, and basically drives insulin resistance, this phenomenon that we now know is at the base of virtually all chronic metabolic diseases. Therefore, your pancreas has to make extra insulin to make the liver do its job, because now the liver's not working right because it's been poisoned. And so insulin levels rise all over the body, and now you've got the risk for Alzheimer's, you've got the risk for heart disease, you've got the risk for cancer, you've got the risk for virtually every other chronic metabolic disease on the plate, all because of what happened to your liver.
Yeah.
And fructose, that sweet molecule in sugar, basically has the same fate as alcohol. So when people say, oh, well, little sugar's fine, the answer is, yeah, because your intestine diverts that little bit away from the liver. As soon as you overwhelm that capacity, now your liver is right in the crosshairs. And that's when chronic disease is going to start.
If you enjoyed that clip, here's another powerful clip that I think you are really going to enjoy.